Food for the witches? In the shadowy world of ancient folklore and superstition, mushrooms were once feared as the food of witches, strange and otherworldly creatures that emerged from the earth, seemingly overnight, with no roots or seeds to explain their sudden appearance. This fear was deeply entwined with centuries-old beliefs in magic, the unknown, and the association between mushrooms and death, making them a symbol of both danger and mystery. But how did these humble fungi become so intertwined with tales of witchcraft, and why were they regarded with such suspicion for so long? To understand why mushrooms were feared as the food of witches, we must first step back in time and explore how people in the past perceived them. Unlike plants that could be cultivated and harvested, mushrooms seemed to defy the natural order. They appeared in the morning dew, often in damp, dark places, growing in rings known as fairy circles or witches' circles. These curious formations were believed to be the work of supernatural forces, places where witches danced under the light of the moon, leaving behind these eerie circles as evidence of their nocturnal gatherings. For a society steeped in folklore, such phenomena were seen as clear signs of dark magic. One of the primary reasons mushrooms were linked with witches was their association with poison. In a time when people had little scientific understanding of the natural world, edible and toxic mushrooms were often indistinguishable. A meal of the wrong variety could easily lead to sickness or death, lending mushrooms an aura of danger and unpredictability. Certain species, like the deadly Amanita phallides, known as the death cap, could kill a person with only a few bites. The mysterious nature of these fungi, coupled with their lethal potential, gave rise to the belief that witches used them as ingredients in their sinister brews and potions. The association between mushrooms and witches was further fueled by their use in hallucinogenic practices. Some species of mushrooms, particularly the red-capped Amanita muscaria, commonly known as the fly agaric, contained psychoactive compounds that induce vivid visions, altered states of consciousness, and delirium when consumed. In medieval Europe, these mushrooms were sometimes believed to be a key ingredient in witches' ointments, substances they used to anoint their bodies before flying through the night sky or entering trances during rituals. The powerful mind-altering effects of these mushrooms likely contributed to the notion that they were tied to supernatural powers. Ritualistic and medicinal uses of mushrooms have a long history in various cultures. In Siberian shamanic traditions, Amanita muscaria played a central role in ceremonies designed to contact the spirit world. The shamans would consume the mushrooms to induce a trance-like state, allowing them to commune with spirits and gods. In these contexts, mushrooms were seen as a gateway to other realms, bridging the gap between the natural and supernatural. As this knowledge spread into Europe, it likely became entwined with more sinister interpretations, as witches were often portrayed as figures who trafficked with dark forces. Religious tensions in medieval Europe also contributed to the fear surrounding mushrooms. During the height of the witch hunts, which reached their peak between the 15th and 17th centuries, the Catholic Church sought to root out heresy and pagan practices. Many of the old folk traditions, including the use of mushrooms in healing and ritual, were condemned as witchcraft. Women who possessed knowledge of herbs, fungi, and natural medicines were especially vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft, and it wasn't long before mushrooms became emblematic of their so-called dark arts. Even the language surrounding mushrooms reflects the anxiety they stirred in the medieval mind. The word fungus itself comes from the Latin word funus, meaning death or corpse, highlighting the close association between mushrooms and decay. Mushrooms were often found growing on dead trees or in graveyards, reinforcing the connection to death and the afterlife. This link between fungi, decay, and the cycle of life and death only deepened their association with witchcraft and the occult. Witches, after all, were believed to harness powers that could manipulate life and death itself. Furthermore, many species of mushrooms are notoriously difficult to cultivate, adding to their mystery. Unlike crops such as wheat or barley that followed predictable growth patterns, mushrooms seem to grow spontaneously, and often in places shrouded in mist and darkness. In times when agriculture was central to survival, this unpredictability was unsettling, and anything that eluded human control or understanding was often feared. Witches, who were believed to work with natural forces beyond the common person's comprehension, became closely associated with these strange fungi. One of the most enduring images linking witches and mushrooms is that of the witch's brew. Medieval and Renaissance art often depicted witches stirring cauldrons filled with mysterious ingredients, from animal bones to roots and, of course, mushrooms. These cauldrons symbolized the witch's power to concoct potions that could bring harm or healing, depending on their intent. The presence of mushrooms in such imagery reinforced the belief that these fungi were a key element in witches' magical practices, especially given their known toxic and hallucinogenic properties. Despite the fear surrounding mushrooms in Europe, not all cultures viewed them with the same suspicion. In Asia, mushrooms like the reishi and shiitake were revered for their medicinal properties and were used in traditional Chinese medicine for thousands of years. The divergence in perception highlights the role that cultural context plays in shaping how natural phenomena are understood. As time went on and scientific knowledge expanded, the fear of mushrooms as the food of witches began to fade. By the 18th and 19th centuries, naturalists and botanists like Carl Linnaeus and Elias Magnus Fries began to classify and study fungi, demystifying them and separating the edible species from the toxic ones. With the rise of modern science, the superstition surrounding mushrooms gradually diminished, though their association with the occult persisted in folklore and literature. Today, mushrooms are no longer feared as the food of witches, but their ancient reputation still lingers in popular culture. Fairy tales like Hansel and Gretel feature witches living in the woods, surrounded by mushrooms, and many modern Halloween decorations depict witches' cauldrons bubbling with all manner of strange fungi. While we may no longer fear mushrooms in the same way, their long history as symbols of magic and mystery continues to capture our imagination. As we've come to understand more about the natural world, we've shed many of these fears, but the shadow of the past still hangs over these fascinating organisms, reminding us of a time when the boundaries between magic and science were far less defined.